With 4 NHL playoff series still going on and the second round of the playoffs looming with the weekend ahead, it's time to dive into another edition of the Locked On NHL Power Rankings.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Locked On NHL Power Rankings. I am the host, Locked On Oilers, Nick Zararis. That is the host of Locked On Penguins, Hunter Hodies. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go Game Off. We got to talk more. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. Download now, Monopoly Go. It is free on Google Play or the Apple App Store. Game on. So today's show, Hunter and I are going to break down all 8 of the NHL playoff series. We're going to open first segment. We'll touch on the 4 series that have already wrapped up. Some notes maybe about the teams departed, things they might be looking at going into the summer. And then on the flip side, teams that have advanced, what their potential matchup's going to look like, or if we don't know who their matchup is, just a little more general conversation. Our second segment, we're going to touch on the 2 series that are going to go tomorrow, Toronto, Boston, Nashville, Vancouver. So Thursday night when you're listening to this. And then to wrap up, we're going to touch on Dallas, Vegas, and then Edmonton and the Kings. So, Hunter, let's get on into it, talking about the series that have already concluded. We'll start with the sweep because there's not a lot to talk about in that Rangers-Capitals series. Capitals weren't a playoff team. They got in by default. They didn't have much of a chance in this series. Everybody likes to joke about the Rangers' inability to score at 5-on-5. The Rangers were pretty good at 5-on-5 in the series because of how bad Washington was. And I think the telltale, when you go look at the splits, the Rangers outscored Washington 15-7. Washington scored 7 goals across 4 games. You can't win. You might win 1 playoff game if you score 7 goals in today's NHL. If you're in that Winnipeg, Colorado series, you need 7 goals. But Washington's in a weird place. Nobody really expects a whole lot from them. For them, it's just about it's about getting Ovechkin the goal record. Other than that, they don't really have a lot of long-term objectives as a team.
Yeah, I mean, this was very expected heading into the playoffs. And yeah, as someone who hosts a podcast about the Penguins, I can sit here all day and say the Penguins would have given them a better fight, or the Red Wings.
I think so too, for what it's worth, but continue.
I do think the Penguins would have won a game against the Rangers, but again, I don't want to have copium for this just because they didn't make it, because they screwed around for 65 to 68 games and they blew it and lost so many leads just like the Detroit Red Wings did. But for this series overall, yeah, I mean, the Capitals, they didn't score at all. And Nick, this was a problem for them during the regular season. I mean, they were limping into the playoffs because this was a team that was scoring 2 or fewer goals virtually every game for their final 6 to 8 to 10 games. And if they want to get back to the playoffs next year, they need a brand new top line. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Alex Ovechkin, who I think is the greatest goal scorer this league has ever seen, or Dylan Strome, but I think at this point, Ovi, for as good as he's been, I don't know if he's a top line player.
He's a second-line player. In today's NHL, with his skill set, he's a second-line player. He needs guys to drive the bus for him. He can't make plays for himself anymore.
Right. No, I mean, and you saw that on display in this series. I like Dylan Strome, but he's not a number 1 center on a cup contending team. Connor McMichael is surely not. I think he's a 3rd-line center on a cup contending team. That Caps lineup needs a full bona fide first line. But the problem is, those type of players, they don't grow on trees and they hardly become available very often. So I don't know how this gets better for Washington next year. I agree. I think it's all about the goal record for Ovechkin next season. But again, if they want to make the playoffs, they're going to have to get a lot more scoring to that lineup.
Completely agreed with you. We'll circle back to the Rangers once we talk about Carolina, because that matchup is set. It's, from what I've been told, going to start Sunday, whether it's Sunday afternoon or Sunday night. It depends on if the Knicks host a playoff game on Saturday. If they do, it would be Sunday night. If they don't, it would be Sunday afternoon. Carolina took care of business. The Islanders, much like the Capitals, nice regular season story. It was good that Wall got his feet under him. They were able to go on the nice little run. You have a lot of questions about Ilya Sorokin based on the way the season ended. You pretty much are going to pencil in an entire new 4th line because all 3 members of the identity line are unrestricted free agents. There's a good chance Clutterbuck and Matt Martin both retire. That is a team that is probably capped out at, the 8th best team in the East in a good year if everything breaks right for them. But Carolina's as good as advertised, if not better. The Islanders were exactly what we thought they were.
Right. I mean, I said heading into the playoffs, I didn't think the Islanders or the Capitals stood a chance to win their 2 series, and they went a combined 1-8. I mean, this just goes to show, Nick, how overrated the Metro was this year outside of 2 bona fide Stanley Cup contenders. Outside of those 2 teams, the rest of that division was a bunch of mid to flat out awful teams overall. So with the Islanders case, I'm curious to see how many changes they make, if at all. I mean, Lou Lamoriello, it feels like he never really makes that many changes to his team. I also don't even know if he's going to be the GM next year. That's something that they're going to have to tackle. I think there's questions about Brock Nelson maybe heading into next year. I know he had a good year, but I can maybe see them dangling him for a different player this offseason if they want to make a pretty big move. You're right about Sorokin. Dobson, I think, had a good year, but I didn't think he had that good of a playoff run for the Islanders. That's still a team that I think needs more of a scoring bump in their forward group. I don't think they have enough scoring to fully go deep in the playoffs. And that's another team, man, that's kind of stuck in neutral. I'm not really sure what the full plan is for the Islanders. I think they're a team that is fine with just making the playoffs at this point. I think they like the revenue for tickets and all that, but I just definitely think that's a team that's middling. But Carolina, they showed why they are a Stanley Cup contender in this series. And boy, oh boy, Carolina, New York, that's going to be cinema in the second round.
Absolutely. Well, Florida, Tampa Bay didn't have the horses, just not deep enough. But they did as best they could with the situation they had, but Florida pulled away over the course of that series. It was good. Tampa won 1 game. We'll see about Stamkos once they decide on that. I think that'll dictate pretty much how everything else goes. If Stamkos leaves, I think you'll see more of a transition towards a younger team. If he stays, I think they'll keep running it back like they've been the last 2 years. They'll be competitive, but they're not a serious Stanley Cup contender anymore without the depth. Colorado, Winnipeg, Colorado ran away with it. We thought Winnipeg would be a little bit better. Connor Hellebuck wasn't able to raise his game to steal one, and that's what the Jets would have needed in that series. Hellebuck wasn't awful, but he was not great, and the Jets needed him to be great in that series for them to have a chance, and it's hard when your goalie's your best player, and that's what the Jets ran into. You could argue that's kind of what happened to the Lightning, where Vasilevsky did what he could, but they didn't have enough. That's really the story of all of these first-round early exits. The teams that lost, they don't have the depth to compete with the teams that beat them.
Right. Tampa Bay, I think, is too top heavy at this point, and they also weren't a good 5-on-5 team heading into the series. They were a below average team at even strength heading into the series against a Panthers team that's one of the best 5-on-5 teams in the league, and the Panthers just absolutely owned them at 5-on-5 in this series. Yeah, Tampa Bay struck back a little bit on the power play, but the Panthers were still able to mitigate it just enough that it really didn't matter that much because they won this series in 5 games. The Lightning really had no answer for the Panthers forward depth. And for as good as Vasilevsky played, Nick, Bobrovsky was just that much better. He turned into playoff Bobrovsky that we saw last year. And again, when Florida's humming like this, I'll say this again for everyone, I don't know if there's a team in the East that can beat them 4 out of 7 times when they play like they played against Tampa Bay. As for the other series, I said it on the show last week. I'll say it again here. There is nothing Winnipeg can do when Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar go into God mode. That is exactly what happened. They had no chance to stop them because Jared Bednar was like, okay, we lose game 1. I'm just going to ride these two for almost half the game, basically. And that's what he did. They were out there virtually every shift, and they owned Winnipeg. It didn't matter who Rick Bowness was putting out there against them. Makar and McKinnon just destroyed the Jets. And you can throw Ranson in there as well. Georgiev really settled down after game 1 because I had 2012 Marc-Andre Fleury vibes from Georgiev after that game, but he was able to play a lot better in the rest of that series. And Hellebuck, very mortal. He needed to come close to his Vezina level from the regular season. Heck, maybe not even at that level. He needed to just be good, not great, but he couldn't even get to the good part. He was just below average in this series. And again, to a team like Colorado, that's not good enough.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And coming up next on Locked On NHL, we're going to dive into Toronto, Boston, and Nashville, Vancouver. So stick around. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Penalty, delay of game. You already talked about that, but there's so much good stuff in this game. Monopoly Go, you can build up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges, a ton, include their own mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine, and there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench, go download it now. It is free on Google Play or the Apple App Store. Game on. Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On NHL a part of your Thursday afternoon as we dive into the first round of the NHL playoffs, with the second round set to start as soon as we wrap up a few series. I have found, this is going to sound weird, I have found the narratives about Toronto-Boston far more interesting than the actual games. The games themselves have been mildly competitive. They've been close, but the narratives are infinitely more compelling. I mean, 2 days ago, there was a bubbling consensus to run Mitch Marner out of town with pitchforks and torches. Now the Leafs are one game away from forcing a game 7, and I don't feel like the Bruins have done anything wrong in the games they've lost. You know, you lose in overtime, it happens. That's why I've found a lot of the commentary about the Bruins after the loss yesterday so weird. Like, I was watching the Stars and Golden Knights game before we started recording, and Subban was like obliterating the Bruins like they played the worst game of all time. They lost in overtime on a net front scramble to a team that's talented. Like, I know the Leafs haven't played well, but it's not like they lost to the Coyotes. Like, let's have a little perspective here. I feel that it's a pretty close series. Nylander coming back matters. Whether or not Matthews can go for game 6, we have to figure it out. It seemed like Joe Woll was a nice bump for them, gave them a little bit of juice, but I feel like the narratives are a lot more interesting than the game.
Buddy, the narratives are why everyone tunes into the Bruins Leafs. I mean, come on. Leafs lose this series. What happens this summer with Mitch Marner? What happens to Sheldon Keefe? If the Bruins lose this series, man, the ghost of last year comes back to haunt them after they blew that 3-1 series lead to the Panthers. It would happen again if they were to do it here. There's so many outstanding narratives. That is what I really matter now. I'm just messing around a little bit. But as for the actual series, the first 4 games, it looked like just typical Bruins Leafs throughout the last several years, where it's just the Leafs, they do everything right, but they're still not able to beat the Bruins. And then it was kind of happening in game 5 a little bit as well, Nick. The Leafs, I thought, played their best game of the series in that game, but Jeremy Swayman was playing his tail off. And once that game went to overtime, I know what happened last year with the Bruins. I was still like, man, this is setting up for another classic Leafs heartbreak. But no, you get that goal from Matthew Nye just a couple minutes into the overtime. You send this now back to Toronto with a chance for Austin Matthews to come back. I just hope this doesn't go like one of the series did a few years ago, where they can tie up the series, it goes back to Boston, and then we all know what happens with the Bruins winning. So this is, no matter what happens, we are in for a storybook ending for this series. And again, whoever wins, whoever loses, the narratives are going to be incredible heading into the second round, and then for the other team heading into the offseason. I still think the Leafs, need a little bit more from Mitch Marner. I don't think he's been good enough in this series, and I know hindsight is 20/20, but you should have started Woll when the series started, because he was a rock in game 5.
I don't inherently disagree with you. I think based on the workload in the regular season, you got to have Samsonov out there. And I think before we switch gears to Nashville, Vancouver, the thing that stuck out to me in that series is that when the Bruins are playing well, you just can't get to the middle against them, whether it's with a pass or skating in there. They just have the middle on clamps. I mean, you got to give Montgomery a lot of credit for how disciplined and tight that team plays defensively. And when you are in the playoffs, if you cannot score consistently, and the Bruins have a couple guys who are good individual talents, but the Bruins are always going to have to be an effort and some of their parts group because they don't have, as deep a team as they've had in years past. But switching up gears to Nashville, Vancouver, if they don't hit that post, we're having a very different conversation right now. If Nashville wins game 4, they're up 3-2 right now. And we're having a very different conversation. I feel Nashville has played really well. I feel Nashville has more than shown they can hang with Vancouver. Vancouver being down to their third goalie, less than ideal. Anytime you're down to your third goalie, at that point you're praying. You're not expecting anything from him. Silovs hasn't been awful, but, he's not that your Demko. When Demko's on, one of the 5 best goalies in the world, one of the 10 best goalies in the world. And if you don't have that as part of your inherent plan, the way the Canucks did all season, then you're going to start to have questions. I think Nashville is going to give them a hell of a game 6, and I would not be surprised if Nashville forces a game 7.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised either, especially with Nashville having the home ice advantage back home at Bridgestone Arena. That place is going to be rocking. But if Vancouver does want to win this series in 6 and head back to Vancouver going into the second round against one of the Oilers or the Kings, I'm going to keep saying this. They need to get Elias Pettersson going. He has only 2 points in 5 games in this series, both assists. He has not scored. He is arguably their best player, but he needs to play like it. I'm sorry. I know these are small sample sizes, but when the playoffs come around, you need your best players to be your best players, and Pettersson has not done that. I mean, Besser's been great. JT Miller's been great. Quinn Hughes is on another level once again in the playoffs, but they really need Pettersson to wake up in this series. And as for the third goalie, I feel like he's doing what he can. I mean, he's giving them at least average goaltending in these games. It's not like he's giving up howlers like you saw Louis Domingue did against the Rangers a couple years ago. But I feel like he's played well in the couple games that he's played in. So I'm curious to see how that goes. And you're right. I mean, if Colton Sisson doesn't hit the post there and they hit Santi Netter, yeah, they're up 3-2 and they have a chance to win the series. That's the fine line in a playoff series. And that game 5 was really close overall. It looked like Vancouver was going to win that game in the third period after they took the lead, but Nashville showed a lot of stones coming back to win that game in the third period on the road. I picked Vancouver in 6 heading into this series. I'm going to stick with it, but I still would not be surprised if this series goes back to Vancouver.
And speaking of stones, Nashville has shown a lot of resilience, and we're going to talk about Dallas and Vegas coming up in the next segment. You want to talk about Dallas has shown you a lot in this series, and sure, Vegas very well could go on and win the series ultimately. But if you're a Stars fan and you came back from 2-0 down against that Vegas team and you went to a game 7, you got to feel pretty good about your team. And then we get into the game 7, the inherent variance of one single game. But one last thought on Nashville, Vancouver. I have been thoroughly impressed with Nashville's ability to make up for the talent disparity by just playing with so much energy. They are everywhere, especially in the offensive zone. If Andrew Burnett doesn't win Coach of the Year, I'd be surprised. I feel like he should. I would have voted for John Cooper, but I feel like the prevailing narrative amongst hockey people, it'll probably end up being one of the 2 coaches in this series. It'll either be Tocchet or Burnett. But coming up next on Locked On NHL, we are going to touch on the Oilers-Kings series and then the highly, highly competitive Stars-Golden Knights series, so stick around. Hockey fans, we are in the best stretch of the sports calendar. We've got the NBA and NHL playoffs running concurrently. Major League Baseball is in full swing, and it's winner take all time over in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, prayer, props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And as we head closer and closer to the weekend and the start of the second round of the NHL playoffs, I think it's time we spend a solid 7 minutes talking about Vegas-Dallas, because that's what it looks like, man. when you are trying to convince your casual hockey friends, or you're trying to convince people to watch the hockey playoffs, you point it like that. You point at games like that, because those games have been incredible. There is so much action on the ice. It is so fast. It is so crisp. The passes are always where they need to be. Both teams featuring those buzzing, annoying forwards who are always around the net. For Dallas, it's Wyatt Johnston and Logan Stankoven. For Vegas, it's Barbashev and Mark Stone, who are just everywhere, and there's no room. And both of these goalies are in hell because they're constantly getting badgered by guys in and around the net front. And that is what it looks like. We were talking about it before we started recording. You make an argument those are the two best teams in the entire league, and they're playing each other in the first round. I mean, I was looking at it before. The goal differential in this series, it's 14-13 in favor of Dallas. Dallas has a 1-goal edge in 5-on-5 goals, and then they're even on special teams, 4 apiece. You go and look over at the stats. I mean, Dallas 25% on the power play, and then where's Vegas? Vegas is 33%, and then on the kill, Vegas is at 75% and Dallas is down at 66%, which would lead you to believe that if Dallas can tighten up a little bit on the kill, they really have a shot here. And to come back from 2-0 down against Vegas on the road takes a different kind of level of mental resolve. And I was talking about it with somebody the other day that of this era, of the post-2012 lockout era, the Stars are one of those teams, kind of like the Rangers last decade, the Sharks last decade. They've been on quite a few runs. They've made a couple conference finals. They made the one cup final. A lot of those guys have calcified wounds. They have the requisite experience and mental toughness to draw upon from previous experiences. Where 2-0 down to Vegas, another team wilts. You know, if that's Edmonton, if that's Winnipeg, those teams are folding in that situation, in my opinion. The fact that Dallas was able to come from 2-0 down, and it wasn't their big guys. It was guys like Stankoven. It was Wyatt Johnston. It is Miro Heiskanen. I shouldn't say that about Miro. He is one of their big guys, but it is Thomas Harley. It is their depth that has kept them in this series, and it's given them enough time to get back in this series. I hope they play that series best of 15.
Best of 9, best of 11, best of 13, best of 15. This is absolute cinema. That is what this series is. By far the best series in the first round. You saw Vegas really take it to Dallas to start it. They're going to go up 2-0 in pretty decisive fashion, I thought, Nick. I thought they were by far the better team in those two games, and then Dallas just punches right back. And then out. This is a heavyweight battle. And I know I'm going to make a fictional reference here, whatever. It almost kind of reminds me of just one of the Rocky fights. Punching right back and forth. And that is what this series is in a nutshell. You saw Dallas punch back in game 3. You saw them punch back again in game 4. And then you see them win this crazy back and forth affair in game 5. And it's awesome, man. I am having so much fun watching this series. Jack Eichel, he has been on another level in this series for Vegas. Mark Stone, he's obviously been great, but you said it for Dallas. It's not even, Robertson, Hens, Pavelski. It's the younger guys that have been giving Vegas absolute hell in this series. Ottinger has really bounced back these last 3 games as well. That is a big development for the Stars if they want to go on a deep run. And this might be one of the more impressive comebacks that I've seen in a while, if the Stars are able to finish this off in game 6 or game 7. This Vegas team is no slouch. They went up 2-0 for a reason. They were a team that nobody wanted to face in the first round because of how healthy they got and because of how dangerous they are in any situation on the ice. And the way the Stars have just dominated them the last 3 games, it shows why they were the number 1 seed in the conference this year, because not many teams can do that to Vegas overall. So I really hope we get 7 out of this series. Even though the first round has not been good, to say the least, this series has at least been a blast to watch. You said it. There's really, honestly, not that much room out there for either teams. Both play so stout in their own zone. So when you get a chance, you have to convert on it. And it makes for some really fun gameplay on a nightly basis.
Oh, completely agreed with you there. I was going to bring this up during the Boston conversation, but we can do it in this series. We can talk about it in regards to the Kings and the Oilers as well. Where are you at on the random goalie switch for no real reason? Like Vegas going to Hill, like I didn't feel Logan Thompson was the reason they were having a hard time. I didn't feel Cam Talbot was the reason the Kings were having a hard time. I didn't feel like Varlamov was when they went back to Sorokin for the one game before Sorokin got pulled. I feel like coaches are making that move trying to spark the team as opposed to actually getting like a change in the hockey results.
That is exactly what it is. You took the words right out of my mouth there. They're just trying to give their team a spark and to give another goalie a chance to at least play decently during the regular season to see if that goalie can kind of take the reins and run with it. And at times it's worked. I mean, for example, I've covered the Penguins for a while. It's worked in 2016 and 2017, especially in 2017 when Fleury started at the first half. Matt Murray takes over. He goes the rest of the way. You had Matt Murray for the most part in 2016. Then Fleury came in just because Mike Sullivan thought the team needed a spark. But then he goes back to Matt Murray, and then Fleury never really saw the net again in that run. So sometimes it does work, but in other situations, there's really no point. And I mean, we were having this discussion about the Boston 1-2 as well, Nick. I know they've rotated between Swayman and Ullmark throughout the season, but in the playoffs, you got to just pick one, at least for a time, and stick with it. At least they're doing that right now with Swayman. I definitely could see them going to Ullmark in Game 6 just because they've done that all year. But if I'm Jim Montgomery, I'm still riding Swayman. He was great in Game 5. He wasn't the reason why they lost at all. For LA, their goaltending situation has just been kind of murky all year. I don't think Cam Talbot was the reason why they went down 3-1 either, but I definitely think he was trying to at least spark something there. At least in Toronto's case, I think starting Wool a little earlier on would have made sense just because I think when you look at both of them on top of their games, I think Wool is their goalie, but that's also just my opinion. So you have to be careful with it. In some situations, it can definitely work, but in others, you don't want it to fully backfire, I think. So it's kind of like on a case-by-case basis is how I see it, but you still got to be really careful.
Agreed with you there. And then real quick, we'll touch on LA Edmonton. We're recording on Wednesday night as that game's being played. It's 1-1 at the end of the first. But generally speaking about the series, it feels like that the Kings have done a reasonable enough job at 5-on-5. The goal differential in that series coming into the game tonight was evens at 5-on-5. It was 10 goals apiece. And then the Kings haven't gotten a goal on special teams at all in this series, which seems kind of insane when we're talking about a team like the Kings that has plenty of talent. Like I argued, going into that series, I argued LA had a deeper forward group and arguably a better defensive group than the Oilers do. It was just that the Oilers had more top end talent. It is going to be pretty much next to impossible to win in the NHL today if you're only scoring 2 goals a game, which is what LA has averaged in this series. And without the special teams help, they are looking down the barrel of getting eliminated by Edmonton for a third straight year.
It's so funny to analyze this series because the one game the Kings won, it was a shootout.
Yeah.
But then they lose Game 4 1-0. If you were to give me those two scores and ask me, which team won those 2 games, I would have went Edmonton for the shootout and then the Kings in a 1-0 win. But the opposite happened, obviously. And I felt bad for the Kings, especially after Game 4, Nick, because they threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at the Oilers and Stuart Skinner. But Skinner was just that good in that game. The Kings did have a power play late in the third period to try and tie the game to at least get it to overtime, but they didn't come close to scoring. Special teams are making the biggest difference in this game. I'll say it again. You can get by with one of your special teams units being it's a kind of bad in the first round, but you can't make it by when both units flat out stink. And that's exactly what's happening right now because the Kings power play has gone away and their penalty kill, which has been a pretty solid PK throughout the regular season, it has no answer for the Oilers power play. And I understand not many PKs are going to have answers for the Oilers power play just because of the talent that they can put out on that first unit, but they still need to do a better job in those situations to kill off those penalties. I think the Kings, for the most part, are getting close to average goaltending in this series. I think they're doing everything they can to defend the Oilers at 5-on-5, but they're losing the special teams battle. And if they do end up losing tonight or just the series in general, they're going to look back and be like, yep, we lost the series because we couldn't stop the Oilers power play and we couldn't buy 1 or 2 power play goals of our own.
That will just about do it for today's edition of Locked On NHL. Make sure you are subscribed to wherever you get your podcasts. Leave the show a nice 5-star review. If you are watching over on YouTube, yes, those are our faces. Look below them. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the alarm bell button. Get a notification whenever the new episode goes live. Leave us a comment. Who do you think's looked the best so far through the first round of the playoffs? We will talk to you guys next week. Until then, enjoy the playoff hockey.